The setting sun cast long shadows across the training grounds, painting the village in hues of bruised orange and deep violet. A lone figure sat on a swing, the chains creaking rhythmically under his weight. To any observer, the boy appeared to be the very picture of dejection. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped under the weight of the day's failures. This was Naruto Uzumaki, the dead last of the Ninja Academy, the pariah of the Hidden Leaf. Yet if one were to look closer, past the sandy blonde hair and the whisker-like scars on his cheeks, they might have noticed something unsettling in the way he watched the other children leave with their parents. There was no longing in his eyes, only a cold, calculating assessment. He was not sad that he was alone. He was analyzing the social dynamics of the herd, dissecting the joy of the families as a scientist might observe insects in a jar. He stood up, the mask of the clumsy, loud-mouthed prankster sliding effortlessly into place. He kicked a rock, feigning a tantrum, shouting loud declarations that he would become the Hokage one day. The villagers nearby shot him dirty looks, their gazes filled with disdain and fear. Naruto caught every glance, filed away every face, and noted every name. Their hatred was not a burden to him. It was data. It was confirmation of the rot that infested this system. He walked through the streets with an exaggerated shuffle, his hands behind his head, grinning that idiotic grin that fooled everyone. But beneath the surface, the soul that resided within him, genius, ruthless, and utterly bored, was already 10 steps ahead. The graduation exam failure had not been an accident. It was a calculated maneuver, a necessary step to access the object he desired. Naruto moved through the twilight, his destination not his apartment, but a secluded clearing in the forest near the academy. He knew the Chunin instructors would be looking for him. He knew Mizuki would come. He had orchestrated the entire scenario with the precision of a grandmaster playing a game of shogi against a pigeon. The scroll of sealing was already in his possession, taken not out of desperation, but through a window of opportunity he had manufactured weeks ago. Night fell over Konoha and the forest grew quiet. Naruto sat cross-legged on the grass, the massive scroll unfurled before him. He did not look at the forbidden jutsu within with greed for power. He looked at it as a key. He could feel it, a dormant presence pulsing within the parchment, something ancient and malevolent. It was not just ink and paper. It was a contract, a tether to a realm of death. The Kyuubi within him stirred, sensing the shift in the air. The great beast usually raged against its cage, but now it seemed to settle back, watching with an almost predatory amusement. Naruto closed his eyes, his breathing slowing until it was nearly imperceptible. He extended his senses, pressing his chakra against the seal of the scroll. A voice echoed in the silence of his mind, not spoken aloud but felt in the marrow of his bones. It offered power, it offered judgment. The Shinigami, the god of death, had been waiting for a conduit. Naruto felt a smile tugging at his lips, a genuine smile that lacked all warmth. This was it. This was the instrument he needed to cleanse the world. He opened his eyes, and for a moment the blue irises seemed to glow with a crimson light. He placed his hand on the scroll, accepting the contract. The cost was high, a portion of his lifespan, a piece of his humanity. He considered the bargain and found it laughably cheap. Why would a god fear death when he held the power to dictate who lived and who died? The snapping of a twig broke his concentration. Naruto scrambled to his feet, putting on a performance of sheer terror. Iruka Yumino stepped into the clearing, his face stern but filled with concern. The Chunin began to lecture him, his voice a mix of anger and relief. Naruto played his part perfectly, stammering excuses, looking at the ground, rubbing the back of his neck. He was the clumsy failure who had made a mistake. But inside, his mind was racing, calculating the trajectory of the shuriken he knew was coming before it even left the launcher. A second figure emerged from the darkness atop a tree branch. Mizuki looked down at them, a twisted sneer on his face. He revealed the truth, the secret of the Kyuubi, spinning a tale of betrayal and hatred. He demanded the scroll. Naruto widened his eyes, letting a tear fall at the perfect moment. He acted the part of the confused, heartbroken orphan betrayed by the only teacher who had ever shown him kindness. He ran. He fled into the dense undergrowth, his movements erratic and panic-stricken. Mizuki gave chase, his laughter echoing through the trees. He saw nothing but prey. He saw the demon child running scared. He did not see the predator that was actually leading him to the slaughterhouse. Naruto sprinted through the forest, his senses heightened to an inhuman degree. He knew exactly where Iruka was, tracking his chakra signature with ease. He arrived at the clearing where Iruka was pinned down, shuriken embedded in his leg. The reunion played out like a tragedy. Mizuki cornered them, hefting massive windmill shuriken, promising a slow and painful death. Naruto stood in front of Iruka, his body shaking. Was it fear? No, it was anticipation. He was analyzing Mizuki's stance, measuring the distance, calculating the velocity of the wind. He realized he did not need the shadow clone jutsu to fight. He needed it to restrain. He formed the cross-sign seal, a massive surge of chakra exploding from him. Dozens of clones popped into existence, but they did not charge with wild abandon. They moved with synchronized purpose. Mizuki laughed, swinging his weapon, expecting to cut through weaklings. But the clones didn't dodge. They absorbed the blow one after another, swarming the traitor like a tide of white cloth. They grabbed his arms, his legs, his neck. They pinned him to the ground, immobilizing him completely. Mizuki struggled, shouting in confusion and rage. He expected the idiot, the clown. He did not expect this level of tactical coordination. Naruto stepped forward, the single original among a sea of copies. The real Naruto walked slowly toward the pinned traitor. Iruka, nursing his leg, watched with a mix of shock and confusion. This was not the shadow clone technique as it was meant to be used. It was containment. Naruto stopped a few feet from Mizuki. He looked down at the man who had tried to kill him. There was no anger in his gaze, only a terrifying emptiness. He reached out with his hand, not physically but mentally. He accessed the contract that now pulsed within his mind. He visualized Mizuki's face, every detail, every pore, every expression of hate. He focused on the name, Mizuki. He felt the chakra drain from his reserves, a heavy toll being exacted instantly. The air around them grew heavy, the temperature dropping suddenly. The forest went silent, the crickets ceasing their song as if nature itself was holding its breath. The Shinigami was listening. Mizuki's eyes went wide. He stopped struggling. He grabbed at his chest, a look of pure, unadulterated horror washing over his features. He tried to gasp for air, but his lungs refused to cooperate. His heart, beating steadily a moment ago, stuttered and stopped. The Shinigami's unseen hand had reached inside him and squeezed the life out of him. It was not a jutsu that could be seen or blocked. It was a biological command issued from a higher power. Mizuki's body went limp in the grip of the clones, his face frozen in a rictus of agony. Naruto released the jutsu. The clones vanished in puffs of smoke. He staggered back, the physical toll of the technique hitting him all at once. He fell to his knees, gasping, his hand clutching his chest. The pain was sharp, a reminder of the price he paid, but beneath the pain was a rush, a euphoric electric sensation that coursed through his veins. He had done it. He had taken a life without lifting a finger. He had become a god. Iruka stared at Mizuki's body, then at Naruto. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Iruka was a trained ninja. He knew what a heart attack looked like, but he also knew the context. A battle, a struggle, and then sudden death. It didn't make sense. But looking at Naruto, shivering on the ground, the boy looked so small, so broken. Iruka's mind recoiled from the impossible truth. He searched for a rational explanation. A delayed poison. A secret technique that targeted the heart. It was easier to believe in a new enemy jutsu than to believe the boy in the orange jumpsuit had just willed a man to die. Iruka crawled over to Naruto, pulling him into a hug. He assured him that it was over, that he was safe. Naruto buried his face in Iruka's vest, hiding his expression. He was not crying for Mizuki. He was not crying from relief. The tears that leaked from his eyes were tears of laughter. He had to bite his tongue to keep the sound from escaping. The act was perfect. He sobbed, letting his body shake with genuine sobs, channeling the memory of his loneliness to sell the performance. He felt the headband being tied around his forehead, the metal plate cool against his skin. It was the symbol of his acceptance, the key that would unlock the village for him. They walked back to the village in silence, the moonlight filtering through the canopy. The adrenaline faded, leaving Naruto feeling hollowed out yet strangely light. The world looked different now. Every person they passed was a potential entry in the ledger. The corrupt, the wicked, the useless. They were all walking on borrowed time. As they reached the outskirts of the residential district, Iruka told him to go home and get some rest, promising to treat him to ramen tomorrow. Naruto nodded, putting on a brave face, waving goodbye as his teacher turned the corner. The moment Iruka was out of sight, Naruto dropped the act. His posture straightened, the goofy smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold indifference. He began the walk to his apartment alone. He passed under the streetlights, his shadow stretching long and thin behind him. He felt eyes on him. It wasn't the usual gaze of the villagers. This was sharper, more focused. He didn't turn his head immediately, using his peripheral vision to scan the rooftops. There, perched on a telephone pole, silhouetted against the moon, was a figure. Sasuke Uchiha. The last survivor of the Uchiha clan sat motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Naruto. Usually, Sasuke looked at Naruto with annoyance or dismissal, treating him as background noise. Tonight was different. There was an intensity in that gaze that was almost physical. Sasuke wasn't looking at the prankster. He wasn't looking at the failure. He was looking at a variable he couldn't solve. Naruto stopped walking. He looked up, meeting the gaze. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. Naruto didn't grin. He didn't wave. He simply stared back, his eyes devoid of any emotion, voids of blue that reflected the moonlight. He saw Sasuke's eyes narrow, saw the gears turning in the prodigy's mind. Sasuke had seen something. Maybe not the Shinigami, but the shift in the air, the anomaly in the data. Then Naruto remembered himself. He raised a hand and gave a half-hearted salute, a confused look on his face, as if wondering why the great Sasuke Uchiha was staring at him. He turned and continued walking, listening intently to the sounds of the night. He didn't hear Sasuke move. The weight of the Uchiha's stare bored into the back of his skull. Naruto tightened the headband on his forehead. He had secured his place in the village, acquired the ultimate weapon, and eliminated his first obstacle. But as he walked into the darkness of his apartment building, a single thought nagged at the back of his mind, disturbing his perfect victory. The observation didn't come from him, but from the cold logic of the entity that shared his soul. He wondered if the game had started sooner than he anticipated. He wondered if, in a village full of secrets, there was someone else who could see the Shinigami's shadow. He closed his door, locking it against the world, unaware that the true game of cat and mouse had already begun. To win a game of chess, one must sometimes sacrifice a pawn to secure the ultimate victory. Today, the pawn to be sacrificed is dignity, and the board is the training ground of Team 7. Naruto Uzumaki stands before his new teammates and sensei, his posture slumped, and his expression morphed into a mask of exaggerated excitement. He bounces on the balls of his feet, emitting a high-pitched whine about being late or hungry, anything to fill the silence with white noise. Inside, however, the mind of Light Yagami is cold, calculating every microexpression, every shift in weight, and every flicker of the eyes. He observes Sakura Haruno's obvious infatuation with the Uchiha heir, a weakness so blatant it is almost insulting. He observes Sasuke Uchiha, the boy who watched him from the telephone pole, standing with arms crossed and eyes narrowed in perpetual suspicion. The danger Sasuke represents is real. His intellect is sharp, perhaps dangerously so. But for now, he is just another piece to be maneuvered. Kakashi Hatake appears in a swirl of leaves, his single visible eye curved in a lazy, half-lidded appraisal. The bell test begins not with a shout, but with a sudden blur of movement. Kakashi produces a familiar orange book, flipping it open with a casual disregard for the lethal intent surrounding him. Naruto immediately launches himself forward, screaming a challenge that echoes through the clearing. It is a performance designed for an audience. To the untrained eye, he is a reckless brawler flailing wildly. To the analytical mind, there is a terrifying precision hidden within the chaos. Naruto tracks Kakashi's hand movements with enhanced clarity, predicting the trajectory of the counterattack before it happens. He sees the opening where a kunai could strike, the millisecond where Kakashi's guard drops to turn a page. He chooses to ignore every single one of them. Instead of landing the hit, Naruto deliberately overextends, stumbling over his own feet and presenting a wide-open target. Kakashi's fist connects softly with his stomach, sending him tumbling into the dirt. The impact is controlled, a lesson, not a killing blow. Naruto rolls, gasping for air, scrambling back up with a look of frustrated determination. It is the perfect act of the dead last who tries hard but lacks the talent. He looks towards Sasuke, gauging the reaction. The Uchiha prodigy is watching, his Sharingan inactive but his gaze piercing. If Naruto had revealed his true skill now, if he had actually touched a bell, the variables would become too unpredictable. He must remain a non-threat in their eyes, a fool who lucked his way through the academy. The bell test concludes with failure, as planned, leaving the three genin tied to the posts while their sensei lectures them on teamwork. Naruto hangs his head, feigning shame, while internally he records the lecture as a primitive attempt at social conditioning. He has successfully lowered their expectations. The mask is secure. Days turn into a routine of D-rank missions, mundane tasks that serve as a perfect cover for more deadly hobbies. During the hours while his teammates sleep or train, Naruto positions himself at the mission desk. He volunteers for paperwork duty, an assignment no one else wants. It is the perfect camouflage. Surrounded by the dull bureaucracy of the shinobi system, he gains access to the public bingo books. These are not just lists of criminals, they are a menu. He sits in the back corner of the office, a pen in hand, appearing to fill out logistical forms for lost pets or weeded gardens. In reality, his eyes are scanning the pages, absorbing names, faces, and crimes. He memorizes the details of corrupt Anbu operatives, the Black Ops members who use their cloak of anonymity to commit atrocities in the name of the village. These are the ones who have stained the ideal of Konoha. The mental contract with the Shinigami pulses in his mind, a hunger that demands to be fed. Naruto retreats to the solitude of his apartment, or more effectively, the anonymity of a public restroom stall where no one can see his eyes. He closes his eyes and enters the mental plane, the vast sewer-like mindscape where the Kyuubi resides. The fox watches from behind its bars, a grin stretching across its feral muzzle, amused by the human's desire to play God. Naruto ignores the beast. He focuses on a face he saw in the bingo book, an Anbu captain known for taking bribes from smuggling rings. He visualizes the name, etching the characters into the fabric of his chakra with the mental precision of a surgeon. He pushes his own life force, his chakra, into the contract. A spasm of pain racks his body, a sudden sharp constriction in his chest as the Shinigami takes its toll. He gasps, leaning his forehead against the cold tile of the bathroom wall. It is a steep price, a fraction of his lifespan shaved away in an instant. But the rush that follows is intoxicating. Somewhere across the village, in a high-security interrogation cell or a private office, a heart has just stopped beating. The corrupt official has collapsed, the death looking for all the world like a sudden cardiac arrest or an aneurysm. The first move in the purification of Konoha has been made. The atmosphere in the village begins to shift imperceptibly. Over the course of a week, rumors whisper through the Shino bars and administrative offices. 3 prison guards and a former Anbu interrogator have died of sudden heart failure. It is a statistical anomaly, a cluster of tragedy that sends a ripple of unease through the underground networks. The Hokage issues a quiet order for medical examinations, fearing a new poison or a biological weapon. but there is no toxin to find. The weapon is a thought, a will projected across the distance. Naruto walks through the streets, his hands in his pockets, whistling a cheerful tune. He watches the fear take root. He sees the hardened criminals glancing over their shoulders, wondering who is next. He is the judge, the jury, and the executioner, walking unseen among them. The fragile balance of his game is disrupted during a break in training near the Naka River. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows over the water. Sakura has left to visit Ino, and Kakashi is mysteriously absent. Naruto sits on the grass, pretending to patch up a tear in his orange jumpsuit. Sasuke stands a few feet away, staring out at the flowing water. The silence is heavy, oppressive. Sasuke turns slowly, his movement fluid and predatory. He walks toward Naruto, stopping just outside the range of a casual strike. He does not look at Naruto's face. His eyes are fixed on the mission desk assignment slip that is poking out of Naruto's pouch. Sasuke speaks, his voice low and devoid of the usual arrogance. He asks a simple question about the timings of the missions Naruto took last week, specifically the administrative duty at the mission desk. It sounds like idle chatter, a teammate making conversation, but the subtext is a razor blade. Sasuke mentions the exact hours Naruto was in the archives. Then, without transition, he mentions the time of death recorded for the Anbu captain. The correlation is exact. The captain died at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. Naruto was in the mission desk alone at 3:15. The air between them seems to freeze. Naruto's internal monologue screeches to a halt. The deduction is brilliant. It is circumstantial, nearly invisible to anyone else, but to Sasuke, it is a glaring data point. The Uchiha isn't accusing him, he is testing him. He is watching Naruto's pulse, his breathing, the dilation of his pupils. Any sign of panic will confirm the theory. Naruto realizes that the boy in front of him is not just a brooding rival. He is a detective, a counterpart who sees the patterns in the chaos. Naruto reacts instantly, snapping the mask back into place with such force that it creates a whiplash of personality. He scratches the back of his head, laughing loudly and obnoxiously. He dismisses the connection as a crazy coincidence, throwing in a few insults about Sasuke being paranoid and obsessed with conspiracy theories. He waves his hands around, mimicking the fool so perfectly that the tension breaks, or so he hopes. He watches Sasuke's eyes closely. The Uchiha stares at him for a long, uncomfortable moment, his dark eyes searching for a crack in the armor. Then, Sasuke turns away, looking back at the river. He doesn't believe the act. Naruto can feel it. The suspicion is not gone, it has just been driven underground. The game has escalated. If Sasuke is tracking the mission logs, Naruto needs a scapegoat, a diversion to muddy the waters. He waits until nightfall. Using a shadow clone, he creates a diversion near the village gate, causing a commotion involving a cart of spilled cabbages and an irate shopkeeper. While the guards are distracted, the real Naruto moves to the perimeter of the forest where a missing nin group was rumored to have been sighted days ago. He finds their old campsite. There, he plants a scroll containing a fabricated confession, detailing a plan to assassinate Konoha officials using undetectable poisons. He uses a chakra-infused ink to mimic the aura of a foreign enemy, a subtle trick learned from the scroll of sealing. It is a masterpiece of misdirection. The Anbu find the evidence the next morning. The sudden deaths are attributed to a delayed-effect poison used by this roving band of criminals. The fear shifts from an internal threat to an external one. The village goes on high alert for the missing nin, and the timeline connecting the deaths to Naruto's presence at the mission desk is buried under a new layer of official narrative. Naruto watches the proceedings from the Hokage monument, lounging on the stone head of the second Hokage. He feels a surge of professional satisfaction. He has outmaneuvered the Uchiha, for now. The respite is short-lived. The morning brings a new mission assignment, a C-rank escort task that promises relief from the drudgery of D-ranks. Team 7 gathers at the main gate, the client Tazuna stumbling about, smelling of cheap sake. Naruto complains loudly about the low pay and the likelihood of boredom, performing his role as the greedy, loud-mouthed ninja to perfection. But as they leave the village gates and step into the wilder territories of the Land of Waves, a change comes over the environment. The air grows damp and heavy. The mist clings to the trees, reducing visibility to a few meters. They are walking along a narrow path bordered by thick forest when Naruto feels it, a presence. It is not the killing intent of a brute warrior, but something colder, sharper. He slows his pace, letting Sasuke and Sakura move ahead with Kakashi and Tazuna. His eyes scan the foliage, dissecting the shadows. There, barely visible through the morning fog, stands a figure. It is a boy dressed in a distinct hunter-nin mask, wearing a simple kimono with embroidery. Haku. Naruto recognizes the signature immediately from his studies of the bingo book, though this boy is not listed. The observation is instinctual. Haku is watching them, specifically watching Sasuke. But then the masked boy's head turns. He looks directly at Naruto. The gaze is not hostile, it is inquisitive. Naruto meets the look, and for a split second the mask slips. His lips curl into a genuine, cold smile. He sees a new target, a potential test subject for the Shinigami's power. He wonders if this tool of Zabuza can survive a heart attack, or if he will fall like the rest of the trash. He prepares to initiate the mental contract right there on the path. He focuses on the boy's chakra signature, locking onto the target. He begins to visualize the characters of the name he doesn't yet know, planning to substitute a face for the name once he discerns it. The power hums at his fingertips. Suddenly, a blur of motion cuts off his line of sight. Sasuke Uchiha steps between Naruto and the trees. Sasuke had sensed the gaze, sensed the killing intent that Naruto himself had missed in his arrogance. Sasuke stares into the forest, his Sharingan flaring to life, the crimson tamo spinning wildly. He challenges the hidden observer, demanding they show themselves. But then, Sasuke turns his head slightly, looking back over his shoulder. He isn't looking at the forest anymore. He is looking directly at Naruto. The Uchiha's expression is one of stark realization. He saw the smile. He saw the predatory intent that had been directed at the forest before Sasuke blocked the view. He realizes that Naruto wasn't looking at the enemy with fear, but with hunger. Sasuke shifts his stance, placing himself physically between Naruto and Haku, but the warning in his eyes is meant for the blonde ninja standing behind him. It is a challenge. I am watching you. Haku retreats into the mist, vanishing without a sound. The moment passes, but the dynamic of Team 7 has shifted irrevocably. They continue walking toward the Land of Waves, toward the bridge and the inevitable battle with Zabuza. But the true war is not being fought with ninjutsu or swords. It is being fought in the shadows of their minds. Naruto walks on, his hands in his pockets, his face fixed in a scowl of annoyance. But his mind is racing. He has identified a new threat in Haku and a dangerous variable in Sasuke. The pawns are moving. The knight is positioned to strike, and the god of this new world is beginning to understand that he is not the only player on the board. A shinobi who abandons his emotions is a tool, but a shinobi who controls emotions is a god. The mist rolled off the Land of Waves bridge like a heavy shroud, obscuring the morning sun and plunging the structure into an artificial twilight. The air tasted of salt and iron, the metallic tang of impending violence settling on the tongue. Naruto Uzumaki stood amidst his teammates, his posture slumped, and his expression one of practiced cowardice. He trembled visibly, a performance honed over years of living under the contemptuous gaze of an entire village. But beneath the orange jacket and the mask of the fool, a mind of cold, diamond-hard precision analyzed the battlefield. He was not shaking from fear. He was vibrating with the anticipation of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. Across the expanse of the bridge, the demon of the mist materialized from the fog. Zabuza Mamachi towered over the hired mercenaries flanking him, the massive executioner's blade resting casually on his shoulder. He exhaled a thick cloud of vapor, his killing intent washing over the Jainin like a physical wave. Sakura and Tazuna recoiled, paralyzed by the sheer pressure. Sasuke stepped forward, his Sharingan active, his body tense but ready. Naruto, however, merely cowered closer to the bridge builder, his eyes darting around in panic. It was a perfect deception. While Zabuza focused on the visible threat of Kakashi and the Uchiha heir, he dismissed the blonde dead last as a non-entity. That was the error that would cost him his life. Naruto closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, diving inward into the sewer-like mindscape where the beast of destruction dwelled. But he did not seek the fox's chakra for a blast of power. He sought the connection to the void. The Shinigami contract pulsed in his consciousness, a dark tether waiting to be pulled. He visualized Zabuza's face, the scarred skin, the wild hair, the devoid eyes. He did not need a notebook. He needed only focus and the sacrifice of his own life force. A sharp, piercing pain lanced through his skull, the price of activating the god's power. He ignored it, pushing his chakra into the mental construct of the name, Zabuza Mamachi. In the physical world, the battle commenced. Kakashi engaged the missing nin, the two jounin blurring into a whirlwind of steel and water. Naruto observed from the periphery, dodging stray water bullets with clumsy but effective rolls. He watched Zabuza's movements, waiting for the moment the heart attack would take hold. It was not an instant process like a lightning bolt. It was a creeping frost that would seize the muscles and disrupt the rhythm of the heart. He was calculating the exact second the demon's reflexes would falter. Zabuza swung his massive blade in a wide arc, aiming to decapitate the copy ninja. It was a strike that should have connected, a blow fueled by years of battle experience. But at the crucial moment, Zabuza's hand twitched. A spasm of pain convulsed his chest, causing the heavy sword to dip by mere inches. The wind of the passage shaved off Kakashi's hidaye, revealing the Sharingan beneath, but the lethal edge missed the neck. Kakashi seized the opening, driving a kunai into the mist-nin's side. Zabuza coughed, blood spraying from his lips, but the look in his eyes was not just one of injury. It was confusion. He felt his heart rate spiking erratically, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps despite no physical wound to the lungs. Naruto watched from the shadows of a bridge pillar, his face hidden. He felt the drain on his stamina, a dull ache spreading through his limbs, but it was negligible compared to the rush of control. He was doing it. He was reaching across the battlefield and squeezing the life out of a monster without touching him. Zabuza tried to form a hand seal, but his fingers refused to obey the neural commands. The electrical signals in his body were frying, scrambled by the Shinigami's invisible intervention. Kakashi, mistaking the symptoms for battle fatigue and accumulated wounds, pressed the advantage, driving the missing nin back. Then the air temperature plummeted drastically. Crystals of ice began to form on the railing, spreading rapidly across the ground. A new player entered the field. Haku, the tracker ninja, stepped out from the fog, abandoning the disguise. The beautiful boy with the haunted eyes moved with supernatural grace, creating a dome of sparkling mirrors. He trapped Sasuke and Naruto inside, initiating a dance of death that was as fast as it was ruthless. Sasuke moved to protect the civilian, his Sharingan tracking the needles flying from the mirrors. He shouted at Naruto to move, to stop cowering and fight. Naruto obliged, maintaining his persona of the terrified idiot. He ran blindly, screaming for help, acting as bait. He allowed needles to graze his skin, shallow cuts that looked impressive but avoided vital organs. He needed to sell the struggle. He needed Haku to believe he was just another helpless child. Inside the mirrors, Haku moved like a ghost. He was a tool, a weapon honed by Zabuza to protect and to kill. He threw needle after needle, aiming for non-lethal spots under Zabuza's orders but accelerating the speed to break Sasuke's will. Haku watched Naruto with a growing sense of unease. The blonde was fighting predictably, but his eyes. When the needles came close, those blue eyes didn't widen in the terror of death. They narrowed in calculation. Haku, having lived his life as a tool used by others, recognized the look of someone who viewed others as tools. It was a reflection in a broken mirror. In a desperate bid to end the fight and save Sasuke, Naruto seemingly tapped into the fox's chakra. Red energy swirled around him, a potent mixture of the Kyuubi's malevolent power and his own cold intent. He charged at Haku, not with a kunai but with a headbutt of brute force. He shattered a mirror, disrupting the jutsu. Haku was thrown back, his mask cracked, his breathing labored. The battle had shifted. Zabuza, weakened by the heart attack Naruto had induced, was being overwhelmed by Kakashi and the newly arrived reinforcements of the bridge builder. Seeing his master defeated, seeing his purpose crumbling, Haku made a choice. He lunged between Kakashi and Zabuza, sacrificing his own body to take the lethal blow meant for the demon. The lightning cutter pierced through Haku's chest. Kakashi withdrew his hand, realizing too late what the boy had done. Zabuza, coughing blood, his heart failing rapidly, looked down at the tool who had given everything for him. Naruto landed on the bridge, the red aura fading instantly. He rushed forward, appearing to be concerned for the boy who had spared them. He knelt beside Haku's dying form. The masked boy looked up, his vision fading. He reached out a trembling hand toward Naruto. There was no malice in his gaze, only a plea for understanding. Haku saw the darkness in Naruto, the same void that existed in his own heart. He saw a kindred spirit. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to reveal the truth of who Naruto really was, perhaps to beg Naruto not to become what Zabuza had become. Naruto saw the recognition. He saw the danger. Haku knew. Haku understood. And a dead witness who carries secrets is a liability. Naruto placed a hand over Haku's wound, feigning a desperate attempt to staunch the bleeding. He looked into Haku's eyes with a mask of tears, but behind that mask, his mind was already writing the final chapter. Haku. He pushed the last reserves of his focus into the contract. The Shinigami accepted the offering. Haku's body, already broken by the lightning cutter, went rigid. The light in his eyes did not fade slowly. It was extinguished instantly as his heart stopped completely. He gasped once, a sharp intake of breath that sounded almost like a suppressed secret, and then went still. Naruto lowered his head, letting out a loud, theatrical wail that echoed across the bridge. He screamed his grief to the heavens, playing the role of the heartbroken child to perfection. Kakashi watched, his heart heavy with the tragedy of youth. Zabuza, clutching his chest as his own heart finally gave out under the dual assault of the Shinigami and his wounds, used his last seconds to kill Gato, who had arrived to betray him. The demon died not long after, collapsing beside the body of his tool. It was a scene of poetic tragedy, the kind that legends were made of. Naruto stood up, wiping fake tears from his eyes. He felt a surge of euphoria, 2 threats eliminated. Not by strength of arms, but by the strength of his will. He was pruning the garden, cutting away the weeds so that the flowers of his new world could grow. But the garden was not yet clear. Gato's thugs, a veritable army of criminals, stepped onto the bridge, laughing at the fallen ninjas. They charged, intent on finishing the job and claiming the bridge builder's head. The villagers, armed with nothing but tools and desperation, prepared to make a suicidal last stand. Naruto turned to face them. He did not reach for a kunai. He did not make a shadow clone, he simply looked at them. He scanned the crowd, locking eyes with the leaders, the ones shouting orders. He felt the corrosive burn in his brain as he overloaded the contract. He targeted 5 men at once. The strain was immense, threatening to burst blood vessels in his nose, but the Kyuubi's chakra buffered the shock. The thugs ran, their weapons raised. Then one by one they fell. The lead man, a brute with a spiked club, clutched his chest and collapsed face first onto the stone. The others tripped over him, seizing up in agony. It looked like an ambush, a sudden attack of invisible poison. Panic spread through the ranks faster than the heart attacks. They didn't know who was attacking. They didn't know where to strike. They saw their comrades dropping without a scratch on them, dead before they hit the ground. Naruto stood amidst the confusion, his face set in a snarl of defiance, though his hands were casually hidden in his pockets. He continued to pick them off, a silent reaper harvesting the unworthy. The thugs broke. They turned and fled, screaming of demons and curses. The villagers stood frozen, staring at the bodies of their enemies, then at the small blonde boy who stood like a vengeful spirit between them and death. Fear was replaced by awe. They had not just been saved, they had been judged. Inari, the young boy who had lost all hope, watched Naruto with wide eyes. Naruto saw the opportunity. He walked over to the boy, dropping the arrogant god persona instantly and replacing it with the charismatic hero. He placed a hand on Inari's shoulder. He did not speak of justice or death. He spoke of courage. He mimicked the tone of the Hokage, the cadence of the motivational speeches he had studied. He manipulated the boy's grief into fuel for revenge, into a desire to protect. The villagers cheered. They chanted his name. Naruto basked in the adoration, soaking it up like a dry sponge. This was what he wanted, not just fear but worship. They would love him, and he would decide who among them lived to see the next sunrise. As the sun finally broke through the dissipating mist, casting long shadows across the bridge, the adrenaline began to fade. Naruto felt the physical toll of his exertions. His limbs felt heavy, his head throbbing with a persistent ache. He had shortened his life today. It was a currency he was willing to spend. But the mental toll was more insidious. As he looked down at Haku's covered body, he felt nothing. No regret, no sadness. Only the satisfaction of a problem solved. The corrosion of his humanity had accelerated. He was one step closer to being the entity he envisioned. Kakashi dismissed the jutsu covering Zabuza and Haku's bodies, leaving them to rest. The team prepared to leave the land of waves. The mission was a success. Tazuna was safe. The bridge was built, but the air between the team members was thick with unspoken tension. Sasuke Uchiha stood by the railing, staring at the spot where Haku had fallen. He had seen everything. He had watched the fight with the eyes of a prodigy, his mind recording every detail. He had seen Naruto's reckless charge, the red chakra, the supposed grief. But he had also seen something else. He had watched Naruto when Haku died. He had watched the way Naruto looked at the thugs. As the team gathered their jeer, Sasuke drifted away from the group, signaling for Naruto to follow. Naruto hesitated, then plastered a look of irritation on his face. He stomped over to the Uchiha, demanding to know what he wanted. They stood at the edge of the bridge, the water churning below them. Sasuke didn't speak immediately. He studied Naruto's face, his dark eyes boring into the blue. He was looking for a crack in the porcelain mask. He was looking for the monster hiding underneath. The fight with the hunter nin, Sasuke began, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "You were fast." Naruto scoffed, crossing his arms. He bragged about his power, about how he couldn't let Sasuke show him up. It was the response of a rival, exactly what Sasuke expected to hear if Naruto were truly the idiot he pretended to be. But Sasuke didn't buy it. He took a step closer, invading Naruto's personal space. The pressure was immense. "When the needles hit you," Sasuke said, his tone sharpening, "you didn't flinch like normal. You moved to intercept. But that's not what bothers me." Naruto raised an eyebrow, playing the part of the confused fool. "Then what's your problem, Sasuke?" Sasuke's eyes narrowed into slits. "Haku, when he died, he was looking at you." Naruto felt a microscopic hitch in his heartbeat. He kept his face blank, forcing his breathing to remain steady. "So, he was trying to kill us, Teimei." "He sacrificed himself," Sasuke pressed, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "He died protecting Zabuza. And then you touched him. I saw your hand, Naruto. You weren't trying to heal him." Naruto laughed, a loud, obnoxious sound that bounced off the bridge beams. He called Sasuke paranoid, a conspiracy theorist. He turned to walk away, dismissing the accusation as the ramblings of someone who took things too seriously. "You didn't blink," Sasuke said to his retreating back. Naruto stopped. He didn't turn around. "When the boy died, you were crying, you were screaming, but your eyes didn't blink, you didn't look away. And for a split second before you started wailing, you smiled." Naruto stood frozen for a heartbeat. It was a slip, a micro-expression that had lasted less than a tenth of a second. Sasuke had seen it. The Uchiha's eyes were not just for copying jutsu, they were high-resolution recorders of reality. He had captured the moment the mask fell. Naruto turned around slowly. His face was twisted in a snarl of anger. He denied it vehemently. He shouted at Sasuke, accusing him of being jealous, of being crazy. He channeled all his acting skill into the performance of an offended friend. He even threw a punch, which Sasuke caught easily. Sasuke held Naruto's fist, his grip like iron. He looked deep into Naruto's eyes, searching for the soul of light Yagami. He didn't find it because Naruto had buried it deep behind walls of desperate denial and the Kyuubi's chakra. But Sasuke knew. He didn't have proof. He had no physical evidence, no stolen notebook, no witnesses. He only had the deductive reasoning that had made him the top of his class. The timeline of the heart attacks in Konoha, the convenient deaths of their enemies, the unnatural lack of hesitation in a supposed dead last. The pieces fit a pattern that only a genius could discern. "Let go of me, Sasuke," Naruto yelled, finally yanking his hand free. Sasuke released him, his eyes never leaving the blonde's face. "I'm watching you, Naruto. Don't forget that." Naruto stormed off, rejoining Sakura and Kakashi. He put his headphones back on, turning up the volume to drown out the sound of his own thoughts. He had underestimated the Uchiha. He had viewed him as a pawn, a tool to be used and discarded. But Sasuke was proving to be a knight, a dangerous piece that could jump across the board and check the king. The journey back to Konoha was quiet. The victory in the land of waves felt hollow to Naruto, not because of the lives he had taken, but because of the risk he had incurred. The game was no longer a solitary simulation. It was a duel. He felt the eyes of the Shinigami lurking in the edges of his vision, the spectral form laughing silently at his predicament. Kurama within the seal rumbled with amusement. The fox found the human's predicament entertaining, a god who feared a boy. It was poetic irony. Upon their return to the village, they reported to the Hokage. The third listened to the report, his face aging with every detail of Zabuza's death and the slaughter of Gado's men. He commended them, his pride evident. But when he looked at Naruto, there was a shadow of concern. He sensed a change in the boy's chakra, a subtle darkening that hadn't been there before. He attributed it to the trauma of war and the influence of the Nine Tails. He promised himself to keep a closer eye on the boy. Days passed. The village returned to its routine. The rumors of the heart attack plague in the prison system had quieted down, but the fear lingered. The shinobi of Konoha walked with a little more caution, unaware that their reaper walked among them in bright orange. Naruto stood on the roof of the hospital looking out over the village. The sun was setting, casting the village in a long shadow. He had come to visit Sasuke, who had requested private quarters to recover from the strain of the mission. It was a bold move, entering the lion's den, but Naruto needed to gauge the threat level. He needed to know if Sasuke was planning to act. He heard the door slide open behind him. He didn't turn immediately. He waited, sensing the chakra signature. It was Sasuke. "Visiting hours are over, Usura Tonkachi," Sasuke said, his voice flat. Naruto turned, a wide grin plastered on his face. He held up a get-well fruit basket, a prop to justify his presence. He joked about Sasuke being soft, needing a hospital bed after a few scratches. Sasuke didn't take the basket. He didn't smile. He walked to the edge of the roof and stood next to Naruto, looking out at the village. The wind blew their hair, ruffling Naruto's jacket and Sasuke's shirt. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "I've been thinking," Sasuke said quietly, "about the bridge, about Zabuza." Naruto shrugged, keeping his grin fixed. Water under the bridge, literally. "He was a missing nin," Sasuke continued, ignoring the joke. "A killer, but the way he died, it wasn't clean. Kakashi finished him, yes, but he was already dying." Naruto felt the familiar prickle of sweat on his neck. He controlled it, willing his pores to close. Heart failure, right? The old man said so. Tough luck. Heart failure, Sasuke repeated. He turned his head slowly, deliberately. His Sharingan was not active, but the intensity of his gaze was sharper than any Dijutsu. You know, in the Uchiha clan, we study medicine as well as jutsu. We study the body. Heart failure in a healthy male like Zabuza in the middle of a battle surge. It's rare. Unlikely. Naruto laughed nervously. What are you, a doctor now? Maybe he just had a bad heart, too much grease in his diet. Sasuke stepped closer. And Haku, he died from the lightning cutter. But I saw his face, Naruto. I saw it before the light went out. He didn't die from the wound. The atmosphere on the roof shifted. The playful banter evaporated, leaving only the cold, hard reality of the accusation. Naruto stopped laughing. He looked at Sasuke, and for a moment he let the mask slip. He dropped the idiotic grin. He let his eyes go dead, flat and lifeless like a shark's. He allowed a sliver of his true nature to leak out, a terrifying aura of intellect and malice that promised silence to those who spoke too much. It lasted only a second, a brief flicker of the abyss. But Sasuke saw it. He saw the void where the clown should have been. He saw the god complex staring back at him. It confirmed everything. It was a terrifying revelation, standing on the edge of a building with a monster wearing his friend's face. Naruto realized the slip instantly. Panic flared in his chest, cold and sharp. He slammed his mental barriers back into place. He forced the muscles of his face to contract, pulling the skin back into a massive, fake smile. He rubbed the back of his head, chuckling awkwardly. "Man, you're weird, Sasuke," Naruto said, his voice returning to its usual pitch. "You read too many mystery novels. Maybe you hit your head harder than I thought." Sasuke didn't react. He stood there, staring at Naruto, dissecting the transition. The speed at which the mask had returned was inhuman. It was a level of control that terrified him. He realized he was dealing with something far beyond a prodigy. He was dealing with a phenomenon. "Get out," Sasuke said, his voice barely above a whisper. Naruto blinked, feigning shock. But I brought you." "Get out," Sasuke snarled, turning on him with real anger. Naruto dropped the basket. It hit the roof with a thud, rolling apples across the tiles. He put his hands up in surrender, backing away. Okay, sheesh, just trying to be nice." He turned and ran to the stairwell, descending into the shadows of the building. As soon as he was out of sight, he stopped running. He leaned against the cold concrete wall of the stairwell, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His heart pounded against his ribs. He felt a thrill that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. He had been exposed, not to the world, not to the Hokage, but to Sasuke, the only person who could possibly understand the magnitude of what he was doing. Sasuke remained on the roof, looking at the spot where Naruto had stood. The wind picked up, cooling the sweat on his neck. He replayed the image of the dead eyes over and over in his mind. He realized that the deaths in the village, the prison fatalities, the missing nin incidents, they were all connected to the blonde idiot who wanted to be Hokage. Sasuke clenched his fists. The desire for revenge against his brother was still there, burning in the background. But a new desire had taken root in the forefront of his mind. He had to expose this fraud. He had to stop this killer before he became the god he clearly wanted to be. The Chunin exams were approaching. The entire ninja world would be watching. Sasuke knew that Naruto would use that stage. He would try to purge the world on a grander scale. It would be the perfect opportunity to catch him. Or it would be the perfect opportunity for Naruto to eliminate the only person who knew his secret. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging Konoha into twilight. The village lights flickered on, twinkling like stars. To the villagers, it was a peaceful evening. To Sasuke, it was the calm before a storm. And to Naruto, moving through the shadows of the streets, it was just another night in the game of gods. The pawns were in position. The board was set. and the real game was about to begin. Look at them. They tremble not because of strength, but because of the unknown. They sense a reaper among them. The atmosphere within the academy classroom was thick with tension, a palpable heaviness that seemed to press down on the shoulders of every Jainin present. Hundreds of young ninja from across the elemental nation sat packed into the rows, their faces a mixture of arrogance, anxiety, and boredom. To Naruto Uzumaki, however, they were not competitors or future allies. They were variables in an equation, potential obstacles to his ascension, and in some cases, subjects for his next experiment. He sat near the back, slouching in his seat, his posture screaming of disinterest and idiocy. He scratched his cheek with a pinky finger, his eyes glazed over as if he were contemplating what to eat for lunch rather than the life-altering exam about to begin. But beneath the facade of the dead last, his mind was a fortress of cold calculation. He watched the entrance, observing the delegations from Tsunagakure and Otogakure, dissecting their body language and assessing their threat levels. The first phase of the exam began under the stern gaze of Ibiki Morino, the proctor whose face was a map of scars and violence. As he explained the rules, that the teams would be penalized for every wrong answer, and that cheating was the objective of the test, a ripple of fear went through the room. This was a test of information gathering, a crucible designed to separate the competent from the worthless. For most, the challenge was figuring out how to steal answers without getting caught. For Naruto, the challenge was stifling a yawn. He did not need to look at the paper of the shinobi sitting in front of him. He did not need to use a jutsu to reflect the writing on a surface. He simply read the questions. The complexity was high, designed to be beyond the grasp of Jainin, but the intellect housed within his vessel had tackled theoretical physics and criminal justice profiling in a previous life. He moved his pencil across the paper, filling in the answers with mechanical precision, his hand moving at a steady rhythm that disguised the speed of his processing. To his left, Hinata Hyuga sat trembling, her Byakugan inactive but her anxiety palpable. She occasionally glanced over, her gaze filled with concern, mistaking his stillness for distress. Under the guise of stretching, he cracked his neck and flashed her a confident, if goofy, thumbs up, signaling that he had this under control. She blushed and returned to her paper, seemingly reassured. Naruto noted her reaction, filing it away. She was an observer, one of the few who actually watched him. He would need to be careful around her eyes. They saw too much. The 10th question was announced, a psychological bluff designed to break the will of the weak. As teams began to walk out, accepting failure over the unknown, Naruto remained rooted. He understood the nature of the gamble perfectly. It was a test of resolve. When the time finally ran out and Ibiki announced that they had all passed the first phase, Naruto punched the air, shouting a victory cry that made the room groan. He played the part of the lucky idiot perfectly, his wide grin hiding the contempt he felt for the psychological manipulation that had been attempted against him. The second phase brought them to the Forest of Death, a dense, enclosed ecosystem teeming with predatory flora and fauna. The gates opened, and the team sprinted into the green abyss. As Team 7 moved deeper into the foliage, the air grew heavy with humidity and the scent of decay. Naruto led the way, bounding from branch to branch with exaggerated energy, his loud mouth running continuously about how they were going to crush the competition. Sakura followed behind, visibly annoyed, while Sasuke brought up the rear, his silence a stark contrast to the blonde's noise. They were hunting for a heaven scroll to complement their earth scroll, a task that required stealth and strategy. However, Naruto had a different agenda. He needed to thin the herd. They encountered a team from Omegakure near the riverbank. The enemy shinobi sprang their trap, using a confusion jutsu to separate the team. In the chaos that followed, Naruto found himself momentarily isolated with one of the rain ninja. The enemy lunged, a kunai gleaming in his hand. Naruto dodged with clumsy, panic-filled movements, tripping over roots and crying out in feigned terror. He backed himself against a tree, putting his hands up in surrender. The rain ninja smirked, approaching slowly to deliver the killing blow, relishing the easy kill. It was a fatal mistake. As the enemy closed the distance, Naruto's eyes stopped moving. They went dead, the blue darkening to a void of absolute indifference. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not form a hand sign. He simply looked at the man, visualizing his face as he had seen it on the bingo board, and pulled the thread of chakra that connected him to the Shinigami. The rain ninja froze, his clutching at his chest. The color drained from his face and his eyes bulged as his heart stuttered and stopped. He fell to the ground, lifeless, without a single mark on his body. A moment later, Sasuke burst through the bushes, Sharingan active, searching for his teammate. He found Naruto standing over the body, panting heavily, pretending to be shocked. Sasuke's eyes darted from the corpse to Naruto. He analyzed the scene. No wounds, no disturbance in the chakra of the area suggestive of a jutsu, just a body on the ground and a teammate who looked terrified. It was the same pattern as the prison deaths, the same impossibility. Naruto looked up, his mask of fear slipping perfectly into place. Sasuke, he just fell. Naruto yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the body. Sasuke narrowed his eyes, the spinning tamo focusing on Naruto's heart rate. It was elevated, but was it from fear or exertion? He couldn't tell. But he noticed that Naruto was not sweating, not a single drop. Despite the humid heat of the forest and the supposed life-or-death struggle, Naruto's skin was dry. The most dangerous test, however, came with the arrival of the true predator in the forest. A sickening presence descended upon the woods, a malice so thick it tasted of ozone and decay. Orochimaru, the Sannin, had entered the exam. He confronted Team 7 in the clearing, his killing intent paralyzing Sakura and Sasuke. Naruto stood his ground, his body rigid. He recognized the man from the bingo book, a missing nin of S-rank capability. This was a threat that needed to be neutralized, but also an opportunity. Orochimaru focused his attention on Sasuke, drawn by the Uchiha bloodline. Naruto watched with clinical detachment as the Sannin moved, his speed blurring. He could step in. He could use a shadow clone to distract or perhaps even attempt a mental strike on Orochimaru. But a calculation ran through his mind in a fraction of a second. The Uchiha was a problem, a variable that was becoming too sharp, 2%. If Orochimaru killed him, the problem solved itself. If the cursed seal killed him, even better. If he survived, the trauma would make him more predictable or drive him away. Naruto remained still. He did not move to block the elongating neck as Orochimaru lunged for Sasuke. He watched the bite land, the fangs sinking into Sasuke's neck, injecting the cursed chakra. He watched Sasuke scream in agony, falling to his knees. Sakura screamed for him to do something, begging him to help. Naruto hesitated for a heartbeat longer than necessary, letting the pain sink in, letting the seal take hold. Then he snapped into action, not with the precision of a genius, but with the brute force of a beast. He summoned a swarm of clones, a chaotic explosion of orange and smoke that blurred the clearing. He roared, the sound echoing through the trees, a performance of rage to cover his earlier inaction. Orochimaru retreated, amused by the display of raw chakra, leaving behind a team that was broken and reeling. As the dust settled, Naruto knelt beside Sasuke, checking his pulse. His fingers brushed the curse mark. It pulsed with a dark energy that felt familiar, a void that resonated with the Shinigami's power. Naruto looked at Sasuke's unconscious face. He was gambling with a life that was not his to lose, but in his mind, the chips belonged to the house. Night fell over the forest of death, and the true hunt began. While Sakura tended to Sasuke, Naruto volunteered to take the first watch. But he was not watching for enemy shinobi. He sent his clones out into the darkness, dispelling them one by one to transfer the information they had gathered. He focused on the teams from the Sound and Sand villages. He needed to eliminate the foreign elements that would complicate his future plans. He found a Sound team resting in a hollow, their guard down. He had a clone observe them, memorizing their faces perfectly. Then, in the safety of his own mind, far away from the physical clone, he wrote their names. He felt the familiar tug, the draining of his vitality, a slight shortening of his thread. He ignored the fatigue, focusing on the result. Miles away in the hollow, three sound ninjas slumped over, their hearts stopping in perfect unison. No struggle, no noise, just the silence of the grave. The deaths did not stop there. Throughout the night, reports of sudden fatalities filtered through the mental network of his clones. A team from Kumo was found dead near the southern border. A grass ninja team collapsed during a skirmish, their opponents fleeing in confusion, believing the forest itself was cursed. The exam proctors hovering above on the surveillance blimps began to notice the anomaly. Ibiki Morino looked at the reports with a furrowed brow. Heart attacks in Janine. It was statistically impossible unless there was a poison or a biological weapon at play. But the medical scans showed nothing. The chakra systems had simply shut down. By the time Team 7 reached the central tower, the mood among the examiners had shifted from vigilance to unease. The casualties were higher than usual, not due to combat, but due to unexplained natural causes. Naruto sat in the tower, eating a ration bar, watching the other teams filter in. He saw the fear in their eyes. They didn't know what was killing them, and that was the most effective weapon of all. He caught the eye of Kabuto Yakushi, a stoic Jainin who seemed to know too much. Kabuto adjusted his glasses, looking at Naruto with a scrutiny that made the hair on the back of Naruto's neck stand up. This one was dangerous, not because of strength, but because he was an observer. Naruto filed him away for the next phase. The preliminary rounds were announced immediately to call the numbers, a decision driven by the Hokage's desire to understand what had happened in the forest. The arena was a stark, tiled floor surrounded by balconies where the remaining Jainin and their sensei watched. As the matches proceeded, Naruto stood in the balcony rails, his mask firmly in place, cheering for his friends and booing his opponents. But his attention was divided. Between matches, he slipped away to the bathroom stalls. It was a risk, but he needed to clear the board. He locked the door, sitting on the closed toilet lid. He closed his eyes, visualizing the faces of the foreign shinobi who had passed the preliminaries, the ones who were too strong, too ambitious, or simply inconvenient. He focused on a sand shinobi, a large, imposing figure with a gourd on his back. He pushed his chakra toward the mental contract. He visualized the name Kankuro. He waited for the feedback, the connection, but it didn't take. The chakra hit a wall. He frowned, trying again. Nothing. Opening his eyes, he rubbed his temples. The cost was mounting. The Shinigami was becoming greedy, or perhaps the targets were becoming more resilient. He had overused the power in the forest, and the backlash was a dull, throbbing headache that persisted behind his eyes. He stood up, splashing water on his face. He looked in the mirror. The blue eyes stared back, but for a moment they looked tired. The humanity was eroding, the physical toll of playing God manifesting in the lines of his face. He washed away the fatigue with cold water and put the grin back on. The show must go on. Down in the arena, the battles raged. When it was Sasuke's turn to fight, Naruto watched with intense interest. Sasuke had awakened the cursed seal, and his movements were faster, more aggressive. He dismantled his opponent with a brutal efficiency that was unlike his usual style. He was fighting with anger, a desperate need to prove his strength. As Sasuke landed the final blow, he looked up into the stands. His eyes didn't seek out his sensei or his team. They sought out Naruto. The gaze was piercing, accusatory. Sasuke knew. He didn't have proof, but he knew that Naruto could have done something in the forest. He knew that the deaths were not natural. Naruto met the stare, giving a small, innocent wave. Sasuke turned away, his jaw clenched tight. The Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, sat in his box, smoking his pipe with a heavy heart. He looked at the list of casualties: heart failure, strokes, aneurysms. It was a plague, but a silent one. He ordered an emergency investigation to be conducted in secret. He could not afford to let the other villages know that the exam was a death trap of this magnitude. There were rumors of a killer in the shadows, a new threat that used invisible means. As the exams paused for the month of training before the finals, the village was placed on high alert. The atmosphere in Konoha was electric with suspicion. Naruto walked the streets at night, enjoying the tension. He felt like a conductor leading a symphony of fear. He was untouchable, hidden behind the mask of the fool, but he was not alone. A shadow detached itself from the rooftops, following him silently. Sasuke Uchiha was tailing him. He was not there to fight. He was there to observe. He needed to know the method. He needed to understand the mechanics of this power so he could turn it against his brother. He watched Naruto enter an apartment building, the temporary barracks assigned to the visiting Genin. Sasuke scaled the wall silently, perching on the sill outside a window. He watched through a crack in the blinds. Naruto sat at a desk, writing. But he was not writing on paper. He was moving a pen over a blank scroll, his hand moving rhythmically, but no ink was flowing. He was writing in the air, tracing characters that vanished as soon as they were formed. Then Naruto stopped. He sat back, a look of exhaustion on his face, and wiped sweat from his brow. Sasuke's breath caught in his throat. It was a ritual, a spell. He had seen enough. He retreated into the night, his mind racing. He needed to test this theory. He needed to set a trap that would force Naruto to reveal his hand in front of witnesses, or at least force him to make a mistake. He couldn't go to the Hokage. The old man wouldn't believe that Konoha's most unpredictable ninja was a mass murderer. Sasuke needed to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. The night before the finals were scheduled to begin, Konoha was strangely quiet. The moon hung high, casting long shadows across the rooftops. Naruto sat in his own apartment, staring at the ceiling. He felt the walls closing in. Sasuke's gaze had been constant, digging into him. Shikamaru Nara, the genius who had recently qualified for the exams, had also been watching him with lazy, calculating eyes. Paranoia began to set in. It was a new sensation, one he didn't like. He was used to being the one in control, the one pulling the strings. But now, he felt like a pawn being moved across a board he didn't fully understand. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Shikamaru. Naruto opened the door, forcing a bright smile. "Hey, what's up, Shikamaru? Come to tell me you're forfeiting tomorrow." Shikamaru sighed, hands in his pockets. "Troublesome," he muttered. He looked past Naruto into the room, his eyes scanning the desk, the bed, the window. "No, I was just thinking about the prelims. It's weird, you know. All those guys dropping dead in the forest. Then those sound ninjas dying in the tower before their matches." Naruto's smile didn't falter, but his stomach tightened. "Yeah, crazy, right? Must be some super poison or something. Good thing we're tough." "Right," Shikamaru drawled, his eyes locking onto Naruto's. "But the funny thing is, I was checking the logbooks. You were the only one moving around the night that Grass team died. One of the Chunin saw your clones near the south sector. It was a bluff." Shikamaru had no such log. He was fishing, watching for a reaction, a micro-expression, a spike in chakra. Naruto paused. He knew Shikamaru was smart, but he didn't think the lazy genius was paying that close attention. He needed a lie, a diversion. "Oh, that. I was just looking for Sasuke. He ran off after that mark on his neck started hurting. I was worried about him." Naruto injected genuine concern into his voice, mimicking the loyal teammate. Shikamaru stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I see," he said slowly. "You know, Naruto, people aren't always what they seem. Sometimes the scariest thing isn't a monster in the closet. It's the person standing right in front of you." The conversation hung in the air, heavy with subtext. Naruto laughed nervously, scratching his head. "You've been watching too many horror movies, Shikamaru. You should get some sleep for the big match tomorrow." "Yeah," Shikamaru said, turning to leave. "Sleep sounds good." He walked down the hall, his steps fading. Naruto closed the door, leaning against it. His heart was hammering. Shikamaru knew, or at least he suspected. The net was tightening. He had to speed up his plans. He had to eliminate the threats before the finals, before they could corner him. He walked to his desk to prepare a mental list of names. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment flickered. Then they died completely. The room was plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator stopped and the streetlights outside went black. A village-wide blackout. This wasn't a power failure. This was an attack. Naruto froze. He moved to the window, peering out into the gloom. The village was dark, but explosions were already lighting up the horizon near the stadium. The invasion of Konoha had begun. Panic surged, not from fear of death, but from the disruption of his timeline. This was chaos, uncontrolled chaos. Then he saw it. A piece of paper fluttering in the wind, stuck to the outside of his window pane. He opened the window, pulling the note inside. It was simple, typed on a slip of paper, illuminated by the faint glow of a distant fire. "I know it's you, L." Naruto's blood turned to ice. He looked out over the burning village, his eyes searching the rooftops. Somewhere in the darkness, Sasuke was watching. Somewhere, the game had changed from a silent purge to a manhunt. The god of the new world was no longer unseen. He had a name, and he had a hunter. The sudden plunge into absolute darkness was broken only by the distant, guttural roar of explosions and the rising scream of panicked civilians. In his small apartment, Naruto stood motionless, the typed note crumpled slightly within his clenched fist. The words "I know it's you." L seemed to burn in his mind, a brighter fire than the one consuming the stadium in the distance. Any ordinary Jainin would have frozen in terror, their mind overwhelmed by the sudden collapse of order. But Naruto did not freeze. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity cut through the chaos. The blackout was not a disaster, it was camouflage. It was the perfect stage for a god to operate unseen. He moved to the window, his eyes scanning the village that had scorned him, now burning and fractured. He could feel the hum of the Shinigami's presence at the edge of his consciousness, the entity within the seal stirring with restless amusement at the scent of death. Naruto discarded the note, letting it flutter to the floor. If Sasuke thought he could force a reaction with a threat, he had underestimated the resolve of the self-proclaimed deity of this new world. Fear was a tool for the weak, and Naruto was done being weak. He donned his forehead protector with deliberate precision, tying it tight. It was time to go to work. Below him in the streets, the invasion was in full swing. Giant three-headed snakes tore through the architecture of the entertainment district, their scales glistening under the light of spreading fires. Sound and sand, shinobi moved in packs, cutting down fleeing civilians and Konoha defenders alike. Naruto slipped out of his window, melting into the shadows of the alleyways. He did not run toward the stadium to protect his friends. He moved with a predator's grace, hunting the hunters. He spotted a squad of Otonin harassing a group of injured medics near the collapsed wall of the arena. They were laughing, reveling in the violence. Naruto crouched on a rooftop above them, his orange jumpsuit obscured by the soot and shadows. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, visualizing the face of the lead shinobi, recalling the name he had read in the bingo book weeks ago. He offered a pulse of chakra to the void. Below, the leader suddenly gasped, clutching his chest, his eyes bulging before he collapsed face first onto the cobblestones. The other two shinobi froze, looking around in confusion, assuming it was a trap or a sudden heart defect. In that moment of hesitation, Naruto moved. He didn't use flashy jutsu. He simply dropped behind them, a kunai flashing in the dark. The fight was brutal and efficient, ending in seconds. Naruto straightened up, wiping the blade on the dead man's clothes. He felt nothing, no guilt, no adrenaline rush, just the satisfaction of a task completed. He looked toward the center of the village where a purple, triangular barrier glowed ominously against the smoke. The Hokage was fighting there. The third Hokage, the symbol of the old, rotting world that Naruto intended to bury. He needed to be there, not to save the old man, but to witness the transfer of power. If Hiruzen Sarutobi died, the path to the throne would clear. And if the monster fighting him, Orochimaru, died as well, then Naruto removed the greatest threat to his future reign in one stroke. He traversed the rooftops with supernatural speed, bypassing the main skirmishes. He arrived at the perimeter of the barrier just as the giant spectral form of the Shinigami loomed over the rooftop. It was a mesmerizing sight, the god of death that mirrored the one living inside his own soul. Naruto watched from the shadow of a chimney, his eyes fixated on Orochimaru. The Sannin stood within the barrier, his face contorted in rage and pain as the death god began to rip his soul away. This was it. The snake sage was vulnerable. His chakra was depleted, his focus divided. Naruto saw an opportunity that divine providence had laid at his feet. If he struck now, he could claim the kill. He focused every ounce of his mental energy on the pale face of Orochimaru. He knew the name, he knew the face. He reached into the deepest reserves of his chakra pool, the Kyuubi's energy surging to fuel the contract. In his mind, he began to write the characters of that name, carving them into the fabric of the ether. Orochimaru, die. The pressure in his head was immense, a physical weight that drove him to his knees. Blood trickled from his nose as he forced his will upon the Sannin's life force. But then, resistance. It was like hitting a wall of solid iron. Orochimaru staggered, clutching his chest, his eyes widening in genuine shock, but he did not fall. The white snake aura flared around him, a vitality that was not human, a soul that had twisted and escaped death too many times to be taken so easily. The living soul of 1,000 victims, the jutsu of immortality, it all fought back against Naruto's intrusion. A feedback loop slammed into Naruto's mind. He gasped, his vision blurring white with agony. The connection snapped, bouncing back with violent force. He collapsed onto the roof tiles, clutching his head, a scream dying in his throat. He realized with a terrifying jolt of clarity that his power had limits. He could not simply kill a god among shinobi with a thought. He was not omnipotent. He was just a boy playing with forces he barely understood. The realization was bitter, humiliating. He watched helplessly as Orochimaru, his arms useless and his spirit damaged, managed to summon a massive snake to swallow him and retreat. The Sannin vanished into the night, escaping death by a hair's breadth. Naruto struggled to his feet, his legs trembling. The barrier shimmered and dissolved. The third Hokage fell to his knees, the Shinigami's task complete. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the professor, looked weary beyond measure, his soul severed from his body. He collapsed. A team of mednins who had been waiting on the sidelines rushed forward with desperate cries, their stretchers ready. They intended to save him. They intended to drag the old man back to a life of suffering, a lingering death that would delay the inevitable change. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He could not let the old man survive. If Sarutobi lived, he would remain a pillar of the old order, an obstacle to be overcome later. The new world demanded sacrifice. Naruto raised his hand again, the pain in his head throbbing in time with his heartbeat. He targeted the lead medic, a woman with pink hair. He visualized her face. He pushed the command, stop, heart failure, mid-step. The woman stumbled, her heart seizing instantly, and she crumbled to the ground. The delay was enough. The other medics panicked, stopping to check on their fallen comrade. Precious seconds ticked away. Hiruzen Sarutobi took his last breath, his eyes closing as he passed the torch to the next generation, a torch Naruto fully intended to snatch for himself. He exhaled, the exhaustion settling deep into his bones. He had done what he could. The village was leaderless, the enemy was retreating, and he stood in the shadows, the architect of much of this silent misery. But he wasn't done. He needed to leave before he was discovered. He turned to leap away from the rooftop, but a figure landed on the chimney in front of him, blocking his path. Naruto froze. Sasuke Uchiha stood there, his silhouette stark against the burning sky. He was breathing heavily, the cursed seal on his neck receding, leaving dark, burnt marks on his skin. His Sharingan was active, the three Tamo spinning lazily in the red iris. There was no surprise on Sasuke's face, only a grim, calculating determination. He hadn't tracked Naruto by chakra or sound. He had predicted this. He had predicted that the killer of Konoha would come to this place at this exact moment. Sasuke stated that he knew Naruto was responsible for the deaths. He spoke without preamble, his voice cutting through the sounds of battle. He declared that he had watched the patterns, connected the impossibilities, and realized that the monster wasn't an invader, but a comrade. Naruto's mask, the face of the loud, happy-go-lucky idiot, felt heavy on his features. He tried to pull it up to force a grin to ask Sasuke what he was talking about. But the fatigue, the backlash from the failed attempt on Orochimaru, and the sheer pressure of Sasuke's gaze made the mask slip. The corner of Naruto's mouth twitched, not into a smile but into a sneer of cold disdain. He dropped the act entirely. His eyes went dead, reflecting the apathy of a god looking down at an ant. He told Sasuke that he was smarter than he looked, but that intelligence would only lead to his grave. He mocked the Uchiha's obsession with revenge, stating that true power wasn't about taking eyes or killing brothers, but about controlling the very concept of death itself. Sasuke didn't flinch. He shifted into a combat stance, his Sharingan predicting Naruto's muscle tension. He ordered Naruto to surrender, to face judgment for the murder of their fellow shinobi. Naruto laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He lunged forward. This was not the sparring match of the academy. This was a fight to the death. Naruto moved with a fluid, terrifying precision, aiming not for Sasuke's defensible guard but for his vitals, throat, eyes, joints. He fought like a surgeon with a scalpel, dirty and ruthless. He threw a cloud of shuriken, not to hit, but to blind, following immediately with a low sweep intended to shatter Sasuke's knee. Sasuke weaved through the barrage, his eyes tracking the flow of chakra within Naruto's body. He countered the sweep, driving his elbow into Naruto's ribs. The two separated, circling each other on the narrow rooftop. Sasuke commented that Naruto's fighting style had changed completely. There was no wasted movement, no anger, just cold efficiency. He accused Naruto of not being Naruto at all. Naruto ignored the taunt. He realized that taijutsu was a waste of time. Sasuke was too good, his eyes too perceptive. Naruto needed to end this now. He pulled back into the shadows of a water tower, focusing his mind. He had one shot left before the chakra exhaustion took him under. He stared at Sasuke, locking onto the Uchiha's face. He visualized the name, Sasuke Uchiha. He summoned the last reserves of the Shinigami's power. The air grew cold around them. The pressure descended. Sasuke felt it. The killing intent was different this time. Ancient, heavy, spiritual. He gasped, clutching his chest as a sudden spasm racked his body. But then the cursed seal on his neck flared up violently. Orochimaru's chakra, the invasive, parasitic energy that had been injected into him, reacted to the foreign intrusion. It was a clash of two dark forces. The seal's erratic, potent chakra disrupted the delicate frequency Naruto required to maintain the mental connection. It was like static on a radio, blasting through the signal. Naruto cried out, clutching his head as the mental feedback shattered his concentration. The backlash was worse than before. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning his vision red. He staggered, vulnerable. Sasuke saw the opening. He didn't know what had happened, but he saw Naruto drop his guard. He sprinted forward, his fist cocked back, charged with Chidori. The birds sang their deafening song as the lightning crackled in his palm. He drove the attack toward Naruto's heart. Naruto saw the blue light. His survival instincts, honed by the Yagami intellect, overrode the pain. He wasn't ready to die, not here, not by this boy's hand. He utilized a substitution jutsu, the log taking the brunt of the lightning, splintering into sawdust. Naruto appeared 10 feet away, panting, his body shaking uncontrollably. He realized he had lost this exchange. He couldn't kill Sasuke, and Sasuke was too dangerous to fight in his current state. He looked at Sasuke, his face contorted in a mixture of rage and fear. He spat blood onto the roof tiles. He told Sasuke that he had won this round, but warned him that looking into the abyss meant the abyss looked back. He promised that Sasuke would never know when the end would come. With a final burst of chakra, Naruto leaped off the rooftop, disappearing into the dense smoke rising from the village below. Sasuke stood there for a moment, his hand smoking, the cursed seal throbbing painfully on his neck. He looked into the darkness where Naruto had vanished, his Sharingan seeing the lingering trail of malice that hung in the air like toxic fog. Naruto ran until his lungs burned. He didn't stop until he reached the relative safety of the civilian shelters. There he composed himself. He wiped the blood from his face, fixed his headband, and assumed the persona of the terrified, confused Jainin. He stumbled into the crowd, his eyes wide with fake horror. He asked what had happened, where the Hokage was, acting the part of the concerned citizen perfectly. The news spread quickly. The third Hokage was dead. A wave of grief washed over the shelter. People wept, holding each other. Naruto moved among them, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with sobs that were entirely for show. He watched them with dead eyes, internally disgusted by their weakness and their need for a leader. He would give them a leader. He would give them a god. As the sun began to rise over the ruined village, casting long, mournful shadows across the rubble, the survivors gathered in the streets. The Anbu were moving the body of the third Hokage to the hospital for the final rites. Naruto stood in the front of the crowd, tears streaming down a dirty face. He felt a presence approach him from behind. The crowd was too loud, too distracted by their mourning to notice the interaction. Sasuke stepped up beside him. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked straight at Naruto. His voice was low, barely audible over the weeping masses. He told Naruto that he had felt his killing intent during the battle on the roof. He stated that while everyone else saw a hero who fought to protect his friends, Sasuke saw the truth. He leaned in close, his breath ghosting against Naruto's ear. He whispered that Naruto was not a hero, but a monster. Naruto didn't turn his head. He kept his gaze on the stretcher carrying the old man. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened, the azure darkening to something abyssal. He knew the game was far from over. Sasuke was a threat that could no longer be ignored. The detective had found his killer, but without the weapon, the accusation was meaningless. For now, Naruto let the insult hang in the air. He would let Sasuke believe he had the moral high ground. It would make crushing him all the sweeter in the end. The invasion had failed for the Sound, but for Naruto, it was a resounding success. The king was dead, the board was reset, and he was the only player who knew the true rules of the game. The village of Konoha lay under a shroud of grief and reconstruction, the air thick with the scent of sawdust, plaster, and the lingering smoke of the recent invasion. The once vibrant streets were now muted, filled with citizens moving like ghosts, their heads bowed in mourning for the third Hokage. In the center of this somber atmosphere moved Naruto Uzumaki, his hands wrapped in bandages, his face etched with a look of determined, boyish sorrow that belied the cold calculation working beneath the surface. He carried beams of wood for the reconstruction efforts, wiping sweat from his brow with a dirty forearm, playing the part of the loyal, hard-working shinobi to perfection. The villagers watched him, their eyes softening. The demon child was gone. In his place stood a hero who had fought valiantly to protect them. Naruto soaked in this adulation like a dry sponge, though internally he dissected their emotions with the precision of a surgeon. He saw not gratitude, but a psychological void waiting to be filled. They needed a leader. They needed a savior. And he intended to give them one, though the salvation he offered would come at the cost of their free will. Into this tableau of mourning arrived the legendary Sannin, Tsunade Senju. She walked through the village gates with a heavy heart, her presence commanding immediate respect and a glimmer of hope among the weary populace. Naruto observed her arrival from a rooftop, his gaze narrowing. He recognized that her alcoholism and gambling addiction were not mere vices, but symptoms of deep trauma and a coping mechanism for the loss she had suffered. He decided that he would not approach her as a loud, annoying brat seeking acknowledgement, but as the only one who truly understood the burden she was about to shoulder. He leaped down, landing softly before her, and instead of his usual boisterous greeting, he simply stood there, his expression mirroring her own sorrow. He told her that the village needed her, but more importantly, that he knew she was afraid of repeating the past. He spoke with a maturity that surprised Jiraiya and the other elders watching from nearby. He told her that he would be the pillar she could lean on, the one who would bear the weight so she wouldn't have to break again. It was a masterful performance of empathy, designed to bypass her defenses and bind her to him emotionally. Tsunade looked into the boy's blue eyes and saw a depth that resonated with her own pain, unaware that the empathy she perceived was merely a reflection of her own desires, manufactured by a sociopath who viewed her as a stepping stone. However, Naruto knew that emotional manipulation alone would not secure his future. The obstacle of the village elders, particularly Hamura and Koharu, loomed large. They were relics of a bygone era, entrenched in their ways and suspicious of Naruto's rapid rise. Even worse was the shadow of Danzo Shimura, the war hawk who operated in the dark, whose root organization was a cancer within the village. Naruto realized that to ascend to the throne, he needed eyes that could see through the lies and secrecy that protected these old men. He retreated to the solitude of his apartment that night, sealing the doors and windows. He sat cross-legged on his bed and closed his eyes, descending into the mindscape to meet the beast within his gut. The massive, orange cage that housed the nine tails stood before him, but Kurama was not sleeping. The fox sat with a grin that stretched across its face, its eyes gleaming with amusement at the human's ambition. Naruto addressed the Shinigami aspect of the contract directly. He stated clearly that the current limitations of his power were insufficient. He needed to know names without asking, to see the lifespan of those who stood in his way. He offered the only currency the death god accepted: life. Kurama's laughter echoed through the sewer-like mindscape, a sound that vibrated in Naruto's skull. The fox explained the terms clearly. To acquire the eyes of the Shinigami, Naruto would have to sacrifice half of his remaining lifespan. Furthermore, the psychological toll would increase. The barrier between his humanity and the god complex he harbored would erode completely. He would become capable of acts of cruelty that would make the Kyuubi itself recoil. Naruto considered this for less than a heartbeat. A human life was fleeting, but a legacy as a god was eternal. He accepted the deal without hesitation. The sensation that followed was agonizing. It felt as though a hot poker was being driven directly into his optic nerves, searing away the mortal limitations of his vision. He screamed silently in the physical world, his body convulsing as the chakra networks in his eyes rewrote themselves. When he opened his eyes again, the world looked different. The darkness of his room was illuminated by the spectral signatures of the living. Hovering above every person, invisible to the normal eye, were their names and the ticking clocks of their lives. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw that his iris had changed slightly, holding a depth that seemed to stare into the abyss. Armed with this new power, Naruto began to move through the village with a terrifying purpose. He walked through the crowded streets, and everywhere he looked, he saw the names of the people floating above their heads. He saw the shopkeepers, the civilians, the shinobi. He saw their lifespans, some long, some tragically short. But he was looking for specific targets. He found the two elders, Hamura and Koharu, sitting on a bench near the hospital. Above their heads, their names were clear, but it was the numbers that interested him. They were old, their time running out naturally. He decided they were not worth the expenditure of his energy. They would die soon enough, and he could maneuver around them in the interim. His true target was the one man who operated in the shadows, the man who had no face in the light. He needed to find Danzo Shimura. Locating the leader of Root proved difficult, as Danzo was a master of stealth and subterfuge. But the Shinigami eyes could not be fooled by optical illusions or chakra cloaking techniques. Naruto scoured the village, his enhanced vision piercing through the genjutsu barriers that hid the underground entrances of the Root headquarters. He finally spotted a signature flickering in a secluded training ground on the outskirts of the village, a heavily wooded area rarely used by the regular forces. Above the head of a bandaged man walked alone, guarded by several masked Anbu. The name glowed with a sinister red hue in Naruto's vision: Danzo Shimura. Naruto did not approach him directly. Instead, he utilized a shadow clone, creating a duplicate that approached the clearing from the opposite side, making a loud noise to draw the attention of the guards. As the root operatives turned to investigate the distraction, the real Naruto focused his mind. He visualized Danzo's face, now etched permanently into his memory, and wrote the name in the mental ledger of the Shinigami contract. He pushed his chakra outward, commanding the heart to stop. The effect was instantaneous but subtle. Danzo staggered in mid-step, his hand clutching at his chest. The guards, sensing something wrong, rushed to his side. By the time they reached him, the bandaged warlord had collapsed. Naruto watched from his vantage point high in the trees, his expression unreadable. He saw the lifespan counter above Danzo's body snap to zero. The guards shouted for a medic nin, panic rippling through their usually disciplined ranks. Naruto canceled the jutsu and the clone, melting back into the forest. By the time the news reached the village an hour later, the official cause of death was determined to be a massive stroke induced by the stress of the Hokage's death and the invasion. There were no signs of external trauma, no poison, no jutsu residue. It was a perfect, natural death. The village mourned the loss of another elder, but the heavy blanket of fear that Root had cast over the political landscape began to lift. Naruto walked among the mourners, his face a mask of innocence, knowing that he had just severed the head of the snake that threatened his rise. With the internal political threats neutralized, Naruto's attention turned to the final loose end, Sasuke Uchiha. The Uchiha survivor had become increasingly erratic, his obsession with finding the truth behind the deaths leading him to isolation. Naruto knew that Sasuke was dangerous because he possessed the intellect to deduce the truth, even if he lacked the evidence to prove it. The night before Sasuke's planned defection, Naruto found him on the bench near the Nakano River. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting a pale glow on Sasuke's face. Naruto approached him, adopting the persona of the desperate friend. He begged Sasuke not to leave, to stay and find power together within the village. It was a performance designed to give Sasuke a final push. Sasuke looked at Naruto, and for a moment the Sharingan spun lazily in his eyes. He saw through the act, or perhaps he simply saw the monster beneath the skin. He told Naruto that he was leaving not because he wanted power for revenge against Itachi, but because he needed to find a way to stop a killer that the village refused to acknowledge. He whispered that he would become strong enough to cut through Naruto's deceptions, no matter what face he wore. Naruto dropped his mask for a fraction of a second, a cold, triumphant smile touching his lips before he reverted to a look of devastated rejection. He turned and ran away, making sure Sasuke saw him flee. The next morning, the news broke. Sasuke Uchiha had defected to Orochimaru. The village was in an uproar. Sakura Haruna was found crying at the gate, and Naruto stood with her, playing the role of the heartbroken best friend who tried to save him. He declared loudly to the surrounding shinobi that he would bring Sasuke back, that he promised. The narrative shifted instantly. Sasuke was no longer a victim, he was a traitor, and Naruto was the loyal hero who would save him. By painting Sasuke as the villain, Naruto insulated himself completely. Any accusations Sasuke made in the future would be dismissed as the lies of a missing nin. He watched the gate through the gaps in his fingers, his internal monologue cold and detached. He wished Sasuke luck on his journey, knowing that the boy was walking into a trap with Orochimaru, a snake that Naruto had already marked for death once he mastered his powers fully. Weeks turned into months. The village slowly healed. Tsunade settled into her role as the fifth Hokage, her authority absolute but her reliance on Naruto growing. He became her favorite, the boy who understood her burden. He was given missions, promoted to Chunin, then Jonin with unprecedented speed. He was the hero of Konoha, the boy who had survived the Kyuubi, the invasion, and the betrayal of his best friend. Yet, he was more alone than ever. He sat on the edge of the Hokage monument late one night, looking down at the village he had effectively conquered. The faces of the previous Hokages looked back at him, carved in stone. He felt no kinship with them. They were politicians and soldiers, bound by morals and rules. He was something else entirely. He was a god of judgment. He spoke aloud to the darkness, addressing Kurama within him. He stated that he was the only one fit to rule, that he would sit in that office, not just as the fifth, but as the sixth, the seventh, and the eternal Hokage. Kurama's laughter echoed in his mind, a reminder that with every life he took, his own humanity withered away. Naruto welcomed the silence of his own heart. Emotions were messy, unreliable things. All that mattered was order and control. The years passed in a blur of political maneuvering and silent assassinations. Naruto systematically eliminated corrupt officials in other nations, using the Chunin exams and the Kate summits as opportunities to gather faces and names. The wars of the world began to quiet, not because of peace treaties, but because the corrupt leaderships that fueled them were dying of mysterious heart conditions. A new era of fear was dawning, a Pax Uzumaki enforced from the shadows of Konoha. The village prospered. The people loved their hero, never suspecting that the hand that patted their heads was the same one that wrote their names in death. One rainy afternoon, the door to the Hokage's office opened. The room was dark, lit only by the flashes of lightning outside. The hat of the Hokage sat on the desk, but the chair was occupied by a man who looked like Naruto, yet felt entirely different. His face was older, sharper, devoid of the youthful prankster's spark. His eyes held the weight of thousands of judgments. He was the sixth Hokage, having ascended after Tsunade's peaceful retirement. He sat signing documents, the scratch of the pen the only sound in the large room. An attendant entered, placing a single letter on the desk. It had no return address, only the seal of the Land of Iron. Naruto paused, his hand hovering over the paper. He felt a strange sensation, a prickle of a paranoia he hadn't felt in years. He picked up the letter and broke the seal. He unfolded the paper and read the words written in elegant, precise calligraphy. The room seemed to drop in temperature. The letter contained no threats, no demands for money, no pleas for mercy. It was a simple sentence, 4 words that struck harder than any jutsu could. It read, "Still playing God, Yagami." The pen slipped from Naruto's fingers, clattering onto the desk. His eyes widened, the pupils contracting to pinpricks. For the first time in a decade, the mask of the Hokage shattered, revealing the terrified soul of Light Yagami underneath. The name was a secret from a previous life, a soul buried beneath layers of reincarnation and seals. No one in this world knew that name. No one should know it. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He stared at the door, his breathing ragged. The sound of the door handle turning echoed in the silence like a gunshot. The heavy oak door creaked open slowly, inch by inch, revealing the darkness of the hallway beyond. A silhouette stood in the shadows, just out of the light. Naruto watched, frozen, as the figure stepped forward into the flickering light of the office, ready to face the one variable he had never calculated for.